they are not they're not equally distributed, right? So the last one was, I think, 4 years ago, and the next one is in 20 years. And then again, sometimes it's 3-4 years separated, sometimes 17-year separation. You see there's a pattern that works out, but the next time is in 20 years, and we Bezrat Hashem, we should all be together again to talk about those issues in 20 years, okay?
There'll be a in 20 years.
Okay, we'll find out. But it doesn't happen. But what it does, and especially in 20 years, it'll be even more so. And that'll be a good segue for what I want to talk about. Right. So then people, we'll see what happens. But when it happens, certainly after a very long period of time, people don't remember, what they did 20 years earlier. So there are all sorts of pamphlets that go out, shiurim that are given. Today, it's a relatively minor halachic issues, if you will, that need to be discussed. So normally speaking, we get rid of our chametz the morning of Erev Pesach, so we can't do that because it's Shabbat. At the same time, it's Shabbat. We need to have meals. So what are you going to eat for your meals? So you can't eat matzah because it's Erev Pesach, and you can only eat matzah on Erev Pesach. So how do you handle the bits of chametz that you have? So you have rolls or pitot, and you eat them outside. You deal with the crumbs. How do you deal with any leftover chametz? What do you do for shalashudas? Because by the afternoon, you've gotten rid of any chametz that you've might have had, right? Right? You can't eat matzah, and you can't have a heavy meal, and can you have shalashudas in the morning? Some people will make you go daven early, eat kiddush with a motzi, bench, take a break, an hour later have shalashudas with rolls. Is that okay? All different shitot, right? People who are much more makbid about eating bread for shalashudas than they do the rest of the year at all. Right? Oh, God, I have that last bit of chametz, right? Whatever it might be, the same people we've spoken about them that have that extra brownie to make sure that it can say a bracha achrona. You don't want to have safek shurim, etc. Suddenly they makbid for the chazon ish. Things like that. Okay, yeah, we get it. Now, so all of those issues, though not, God forbid, belittling any of them, maybe a little, but ultimately, in the scale of things, they're not that major. However, there were some very, very big issues and very critical issues of Pesach. Really, 3 that I can think of that we don't think about at all anymore. I'm only going to speak about 2 of them. I'll tell you what the third is in a second. The 3 that really is, how do you bring your korban Pesach? You're supposed to bring korban Pesach. Korban Pesach is sacrificed on what we call Erev Pesach. It might, from a Torah perspective, it's really Pesach. So when you're talking about the Pesach Lashem, so that's on the 14th, right? The holiday that we call Pesach, starting on the 15th, is Chag HaMatzot. Right? So in the Torah it's called Pesach, not exactly Chag Pesach. There's a question amongst the Mefarshim when it says Chag Lashem, is it referring to which one? And there's a nexus between those 2 Chagim on the night of the 14th, 15th. What Seder night is really an intersection between these 2 Chagim. All just by way of introduction, we all think of our calendar as being the Jewish day starts at night and finishes the following sunset, right? Or Tzedek Kochavim. And that's true, except in the Beit HaMikdash. In the Beit HaMikdash, the day preceded the night. In other words, all korbanot have to be sacrificed during the day. There are no korbanot at night. Anything that's done at night is follow through for what was done the previous day. So normally speaking, Korban Pesach is a type of Korban Shlamim. It's a type of the so-called peace offering where the owner of the Korban also partakes in the Korban. It's a subset of that general category. But unlike other Korbanot of its kind, right, so there are two things. One is that it can't be eaten during the daytime when it was sacrificed. Normally speaking, let's say I want to bring a Korban Shlamim. So I bring my Korban in the morning, and let's say the first thing that's done in the Beit HaMikdash, the first Korban is the Korban Tamid, the communal offering in the morning, and I bring my Korban afterwards, and then after it's been slaughtered and whatever needs to be done in the Beit HaMikdash, I take the animal and I butcher it, prepare the meat, and I eat it. So I can eat it let's say if I sacrificed it at 10 in the morning, so by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there shouldn't be any problem for me to be having a meal with that Korban. Korban Pesach, I have to slaughter it specifically Ben Ha'arbaim in the afternoon of the 14th. I have to wait for that. So the halacha says we wait till the 7th and a half hour. In other words, let's say in a perfect day, which is roughly at this time of year. Sun rises around 6 a.m., sets around 6 p.m., so it will about 1:30 is when you can begin to sacrifice your Korban Pesach, 1:30 in the afternoon. And then once I have the animal, I have to wait to eat it on at Seder night. So the Seder night, which is the end of the 14th from a Beit HaMikdash perspective, is the beginning of the 15th from a Chag HaMatzot perspective. So there's that intersection between the two. Now, the animal has to be roasted. It has to be roasted whole. And normally speaking, on a typical Erev Pesach, all of that would be done the afternoon of the 14th. I would bring the Korban. There were three, and this is actually learnt out from a drashan, a pasuk, but there were three groups that would bring the Korban on the afternoon of the 14th, right? And it could be even hundreds of thousands of Korbanot Pesach. We have both Josephus, speaks about 2 years before the Churban, was the largest Pesach on record, hundreds of thousands of people. You feel that, there you have, it's like, it's a cautionary tale, right? At the peak of the Beit HaMikdash, and it's only 2 years before the Churban. But there are hundreds of thousands of korbanot that are being brought. So there's a whole system, and the Mishnah describes at least a bare bones description of what went on. How did they handle hundreds of thousands of korbanot being brought in one afternoon? And they had 3 cycles, right? 3 cycles that were going on. First cycle people would fill up the Beit HaMikdash complex. They'd close the doors, leaving everybody else outside. They'd run through all of those korbanot almost as simultaneously as possible. Rows of kohanim with a chain of each one chaining. But the shechita would be here, and they would pass the blood from one kohen to the next, etc., and throw the blood onto the mizbeach, send the empty vessels back. It was a whole enterprise. They probably practiced for a while to make sure they got it done properly. All the korbanot are done. Everybody takes their animals out. Next group comes in. Same thing with the third group, etc. And Hallel is being said while all of this is going on. The Levium are playing. All a tremendous pageant that happened. All that's happening on Erev Shabbat as well. But now I would take my animal, normally speaking, and not on Shabbat, on Shabbat. Normally speaking, I would take my animal, I would set up an oven, right? And all of this, I'm sure, was there were people who were more than happy to for a price to do it for me, and I would set up my animal, have it roasted slowly over the course of the afternoon, so that it would be ready in the evening. But it's Shabbos, so I can't roast my animal. So the halacha has to be: what do I do? How do I handle it? And indeed, can I even bring the korban on Erev Pesach? And we're assuming that you can bring the korban on Erev Pesach, but is that so simple? The only korbanot in the Beit HaMikdash that were doche Shabbat, that pushed off Shabbat, and that we allowed the korban to be brought, are korbanot tzibur, or communal korbanot, and specifically a typical Shabbat. There were really very few korbanot that were brought. It was the korban tamid of the morning, followed by the musaf, and then in the afternoon the korban tamid of ben arbaim, and that would be it. That would be the only korbanot brought on a typical Shabbat. And here we have, not 5 or 6 Shabbat, animals that are being brought, but we have hundreds of thousands of animals. Can you do that on Shabbat? All right. So that's really a question that begins. Yeah.
The korban tamid on Shabbat.
Yeah.
Didn't it have to be burned?
Yeah. It was.
There was a fire, and they burned.
Right. They brought it out of the mizbech. Right.
It's like a korban. Oh,
it was typical korban. Okay. Now, and even that, the Gemara has to have a drasha for the korban tamid. It's obviously the korban musaf of Shabbat, right? If you don't bring it on Shabbat, when are you going to bring it, right? So the way that we learn the korban tamid is from a drasha from the musaf of Shabbat, right? Because it says, al tamid. So I can be medayek. Well, if I brought a musaf, I had to bring the tamid. That's the type of way that the Gemara learns it out.
But if the precedent is set that there are some korbanot that are permitted, what would prevent something that had to be done? This also needs to be done.
So good. So perfect segue into the discussion in the Gemara. Let's take a look at it right now. So first, we'll start with the Mishnah, which is sort of the spoiler alert. Okay, because the Mishnah here is going to give us what was done. Right? So we know now we're going to have to get to how did we get there, but in terms of the bottom line. So this is what the Mishnah says to the first 2 Mishnayot in the 6th parak of Masechet Pesachim. Just as a general note, Masechet Pesachim has 10 chapters. The first 4 chapters and the last chapter deal with Pesach as it is today as well. In other words, the halachot of chametz and matzah, the halachot of the seder, etc. Those are in the first 4 prakim, and in the last parak, arvei pesachim. The middle prakim from 5 through 9, those are the prakim that deal with korban pesach specifically, and those are known in the genre as Pesach Sheni. Not because it's talking about Pesach Sheni, which we'll deal with in ER in a month's time, but because it's the other Pesach. The other Pesach, not the Pesach that is halacha l'maaseh for today. So here in those prakim, in the 6th parak, the Mishnah says as follows: Elu dvarim b'Pesach dochin et Shabbat. So these are the elements of korban Pesach which are done on Shabbat as well. Shchitato, uzrikat damo, umichid koravav, vehekter chalavav. So you would slaughter the animal, you would sprinkle the blood on the mizbeach. Michui kravav means that you would clean out a basic cleaning of the intestines and the like. Hekter chalavav, and the burning of the fats of the animal, those parts which are not consumed but are put onto the mizbeach. Aval sliato, but the roasting of the animal. Hadachat kravav, and the fully washing of the kishkas, because that you would have to. They would slice the animal open. They would remove it. They would clean all of of that track, and then they would put it back into the animal for the roasting. Okay, in other words, so you would be eating those parts as well, and the basic cleaning, so that you just remove all of the but what's inside the innards, right? In other words, all of the the foul-smelling elements. So that would be done on Shabbat, but the careful washing of it so that you be able to eat it afterwards, so that you have to wait until after Shabbat. Hakavato v'havato michutz l'tchum. Now let's say you have a schlepper, literally, and he forgets to bring his animal into the, he decides to get the budget, hotel outside of Yerushalayim, and he's going to walk into the Beit HaMikdash, right? But it's outside of the Tchum, right? So he starts walking in the morning, right? There are people like this, and he says, but he didn't take into account that he's outside of the Tchum of Shabbat, the 2,000 amot, which you can get to Yerushalayim. 2,000 amot isn't that far. It's a kilometer, right, or so. So out of the radius, he could be in this neighborhood, by the way. In other words, at that time, you have the walls of Yerushalayim, right? This area is farmland, and is possibly, depending on how the buildings were set up, is possibly outside the Tchum of Yerushalayim. But it's not that far to get there, right? So I want to bring my animal to the Beit HaMikdash. I can't on Shabbat. Chatichat iyar balto, or there's a blister on the animal, so I can pop the blister. Otherwise, it's a mum of the animal. It's a blemish, and I can't bring the korban. But I want to pop the blister, and so that way I can bring the animal. Ein dochin et Shabbat. That I can't do on Shabbat. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, but Rabbi Eliezer says no, dochin. So you can't. So there's a discussion. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, v'halo dinhu. Right. So we now get the next Mishnah gives us a little bit of a spy's eye onto the discussion in the Beit Midrash. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, halo dinhu, ma'im shchita shum mishum malacha dochet Shabbat. You're telling me that I'm allowed to slaughter the animal on Shabbat? Elu she'em mishum shvut lo yitchu et Shabbat. These other elements, without getting into the details now, but the idea of the tchum and the idea of the blister, these aren't deoraitas, these are only d'Rabbanan. Right, so why shouldn't we? Of course we should allow it. If you're allowing me to do something which is deoraita, so I certainly should be allowed to do things which are d'Rabbanan. Amar lo Rabbi Yoshua. So Rabbi Yoshua said, no, Yom Tov yochiach. The normal day of Yom Tov will prove it. Shehitiru bo mishum lacha. We all know we're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. We're allowed to do any malacha that's associated with food preparation. V'asur bo mishum shvut. But those things which are rabbinically forbidden because they're muktzah, again, I'm not getting into details now, but if you have something which is muktzah on Shabbat, on Yom Tov, so it's muktzah, you can't use it. And so you say, well, I can do a doraita to prepare food. Why can't I violate muktzah to do it? The Chachamim were more careful about their gezerot sometimes. V'asur mishum shvut. Amar Rabbi Eliezer responds, Maza Yoshua. What are you talking about, Yoshua? Right? Maraya reshut lemitzvah. Here it's a mitzvah to bring the korban pesach. I want to make a barbecue on Yom Tov. I'm allowed to make a barbecue if I want to make a barbecue. So I have to make the proper preparations, and I didn't make sure that my skewers were made properly and they're muktzah. So that's my problem. It's all reshut. But if it's a doraita, so then if it's a chiyuv, I have to bring a korban pesach. So everything that goes together with korban pesach should be included. Hey, Shiv Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva is sitting there. He was a talmid of Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. So he's sitting there and he says, Amar hazat tochiach. No, there's another halacha of the sprinkling of the water of the para aduma, in order to allow people to become tahor, to become purified, to be able to bring the korban. Shehi mitzvah, it's a mitzvah to do it. Mishum shvut, v'hi shvut, excuse me. Ve'ena dochet Shabbat. In other words, if there was a person who needed to become tahor, and today is the 7th day of his tahara process, this purification process, and I need to be sprinkled in order to bring my korban pesach. They wouldn't sprinkle me on today. I'd have to wait for another month to bring my korban, the pesach sheni. So Rabbi Akiva says that is only a rabbinic prohibition. So why? So that proves it. So what does Rabbi Eliezer respond? Right? Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer, skip a line. Va'aleha nidan. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Umayim shchita she mishum malacha dochet haShabbat hazah she mishum shvut eino dino shedochet haShabbat. I'll say you're wrong. You're assuming that you can't purify yourself on Erev Pesach to bring the Korban Pesach. Who said? You can, because you could do the shchita itself. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva ochiluf. Maybe it goes the other way. Now this argument, by the way, it's not clear. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva were all alive at the time of the Churban. So is this discussion going on before or after the Churban? We don't know. But be that as it may, Rabbi Akiva says, I don't know, maybe you can't do either. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, so now the bold print. Akiva, akartem asher katuv b'Torah. Excuse me, there's a pasuk. Ben ha'arbayim b'mo'ado. The Torah says that you shall do it in the afternoon on its proper date. Ben b'chol, ben b'Shabbat. Whether it's Shabbat, whether it is on a weekday. Amar the moa, you do it on its proper date. Amar lo Rabbi. So now, right, he's being addressed Akiva, and he's saying, "No, Rabbi, I think you're wrong. Have li moed le'elu k'moed lashchita." The moed, the proper date for this, has to be like the proper date for shchita. What did he mean by that? Klal amar Rabbi Akiva. This was the general rule. Kom lacha she'efshar la'asota me'erev Shabbat eino dochet haShabbat. Shchita she'ei efshar la'asota me'erev Shabbat dochet haShabbat. What's the difference between all of these cases? What do you have to do? Right? I don't know who was the genius behind the coffee mugs that say, lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part. Right? Okay? That's basically what Rabbi Akiva said. You have to shech the Korban Pesach. Right? You have to shech the Korban Pesach on Erev Pesach. You don't have a choice. You can make sure that you're inside the tchum. You can make sure you can examine your animal's feet to make sure it doesn't have blisters beforehand. So anything that can be done beforehand, and you decided that, to wait, or you didn't plan properly, that's not our emergency, right? Our emergency are things that need to be done, and you don't have a choice. So here, the rabbinic rules take precedence because of the general sense, right? Because why did they make just to take the question of tchum? So the Oraita tchum is a much longer distance, 12 mil, which is approximately 12 kilometers. The rabbinic tchum is 1 kilometer. They wanted people to stay closer to home. So that idea, which applies all year round to every Shabbat, every Chag, is more important than one person or a group of people who say, well, I have to bring my Korban Pesach today. Okay, Beseder, we have our priorities, and those priorities are more important than your emergency because of your lack of planning. Yeah.
Just curiosity, is this the same Rabbi Eliezer who argues with the Chachamim regarding Bris Milah on Shabbos?
Exactly the same approach. Correct. It is the same Rabbi Eliezer, and he has the same opinion. And he basically says anything that needs to be done for a mitzvah that's Docha Shabbat is Docha Shabbat. Rabbi Akiva, his Talmud disagreed. We follow Rabbi Akiva in this regard. Okay. That's the Mishnah. As I said, that's a spoiler alert. That tells us what is the final line, as it were. What about, how did we get there? Now, I'm going to bring this is number 2, the Tosefta. The Tosefta gives an abridged version of a story which is expanded, and that could be very easily a shiur of itself. There's an expansion in the Yerushalmi. There's an expansion in the Bavli on this particular story, and the comparison between those three makes for a really very fascinating study. But I want to focus more on the halachic issues, so I'm only going to bring the Tosefta. Okay, but for those of you who are interested, for this Shabbat, this is apparently it happened on Erev Pesach SheChal Liot Shabbat in real time, so you can and they're available in English as well. To take a look at those 3 sources together, it's really a very interesting study in of itself.
Susman, did Rabbi Eliezer allow grilling?
I'm sorry?
Did he allow just the korban and not the grilling?
Correct. He agrees that could wait till afterwards. In other words, thank you for raising that point. In other words, Rabbi Lezer doesn't disagree with any of the preparations that can be done on Seder night. In other words, now you're going to put your animal up on the spit and you're going to let it roast. And for argument's sake, it'll take 3 hours to roast. Okay, so it just means you're going to have a longer Seder till you get to your Korban Pesach. Okay, but that's what you're going to need to do. In other words, we all start, our Sedarim are going to start later this year as well. Right? We have to wait till the end of Shabbat. Their Seder started even later than that because they had to cook the Korban. We'll see, in a minute, not in a minute, but in about 10 minutes, we'll see that it goes after the Korban as well. But here's the story. Pamachat, one time, Chala Baras Eliyah Shabbat. The 14th fell out on Shabbat. One time it happened. It happens 11% of the time, right? So that's a question that you have to ask. Shalu, what?
This is Bizman Riyad HaChodesh.
Yeah, so it means Bizman Riyad HaChodesh. So they didn't have the set calendar. So they didn't have it. You couldn't look at the calendar and say, okay, in 20 years it's going to happen, whatever it is. But presumably it happened. Statistically it should happen. 1 out of 7 years. Right? As it should be, once you're doing it, the moon doesn't care what day of the week it is, right? So that Shalu et Hillel Zaken Pesach Maushi Yitchet Shabbat. Right? So they asked Hillel, should Korban Pesach be dochet the Shabbat? Amar lehem, v'chi Pesach echad yesh lanu b'shana shedochet Shabbat. What do you mean? You're only asking me the Korban Pesach? There's only one Korban Pesach a year? There are more than 300 Korbanot Pesach that happen every year that are Doche Shabbat. Whereas if you add up all the Korban Tabid that fall out on Shabbat, you add up all the Korbanot Musaf on Shabbat, all the ones that are on Yom Tov, etc., 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 so you will count, 300 animals, more than 300 animals are slaughtered over the course of the year. Chavru alav kol ha'azara. So everybody gathered around. You think that was it? That's the end of the discussion? No, because Amar lehem. So he explained Tamid Korban Tzibur uPesach Korban Tzibur. Right? You could say, what do you mean? That's Korban Tamid. That's Korban Pesach. So he said, no, they're basically the same type of idea. This is a communal offering. Pesach is also a communal offering. Ma Tamid Korban Tzibur v'dochet Shabbat. A Pesach Korban Tzibur dochet Shabbat. Right? There's the communal. The klal here is that a communal offering is doche Shabbat. Normally speaking, that's just the korban tabid. That's just the korban musaf. But add also the korbanot of Yom Kippur, etc. But when Pesach falls out on Shabbat, that's also korban Pesach. Apparently, they weren't convinced because, looking at the bullet points, davar acher, another proof. Nemar b'tamid moado v'nemar b'pesach moado. The word moed in its proper time appears both with Korban Pesach and with regard to Korban Tamid. Ba tamid shenemar moado dochet Shabbat. So I know this is not just my svara that it's a Korban Tzibur. There is a textual reference that connects the two, a gezeira shava. Od kal v'chomer, and I'll give you also a kal v'chomer, just an argument from logic. Ma tamid she'ein chayavin alav karet dochet Shabbat. If you were not to bring the korban tamid, so that's not a good thing. But the penalty for that is not karet; it's not being cut off from the people. Pesach shechayavin alav karet, no din she'itchet Shabbat. The penalty, there are only 2 mitzvot aseh, and in this regard they're connected. That if you do not fulfill those mitzvot, the penalty for the lack of fulfillment brings karet. Normally speaking, the other 34 are all mitzvot lo taseh. But if I do something which I shouldn't do, if I have, an illicit sexual relations of certain kind, so then the penalty is karet. Here, it's the lack of fulfillment. The only 2 are Korban Pesach, if I can bring Korban Pesach and I don't, and the other is Brit Milah. Right, those 2 elements. And the common element here is that they are elements which bring me into the tzibur. They bring me into Am Yisrael. Right, the part of that Brit. one on a more personal level, one on a more national level. But that's the common theme that the two of them have. So he says, if you don't bring a korban pesach, it's a karet. So korban tamid, which you wouldn't get karet. So those you bring on Shabbat. So certainly, when it comes to korban pesach, you should do this. Third point, od mekubalani me
It could be
rabota.
why Mila's Doche Shabbos.
Right, it could be also exactly. Right, though there's a pasuk that teaches, but that could be the rationale behind the pasuk. For od mekubulani mi ravotai, and I also have a mesorah. Right, apparently it's the mesorah that wins the day. It is mesorah is Pesach dochet Shabbat. That's what I was taught in yeshiva. Right. Amru lo ma yeh al am shelo avi sakininu pischein lemikdash. So now we have a problem. It's Erev Pesach. There are people who didn't bring the knives. There are people who didn't, bring the animals. What are they going to do? What are we going to tell them? Amar lehem anichu lehem, ruach hakodesh alehem. Just leave them. Let them figure it out themselves. You'll see. They'll be guided by the Spirit. Im ein nevi'in hen, b'nei nevi'in hen. If they themselves aren't prophets, they are descended from prophets. Ma'asu Yisrael b'ota sha'ah, mi shepischo tleh. So whoever was bringing, you can bring a korban pesach either from lambs or kids, right? Either baby sheep or baby goats. So if you had a lamb, tamnu b'tzamro, they put the knife inside the wool of the lamb. Gidi kashru ben karnav, and if it was a kid, so they tied the knife to the horns. You can't put it into there isn't any wool. It's too thin to hold the knife. Heviu sakininu pischein mikdash v'shachatu et pischein. So that's how they brought their animals and reshechted the Pesach. Bo b'yom minu et halel nasi. Right? They said, okay, now you're the nasi. And he continued. So this is the story of how Hillel became the korban. This is as I said, the expansions are equally important. I don't have time to get into it. There are those who want to argue that he was the one who introduced this way of learning psukim, and it hadn't been done before. All sorts of different ways of understanding this, which are important, but are not for our discussion right now. What you do see from this is, first of all, that the people who were associated in the other sources as a group called B'nai B'Teira. So they weren't aware, they didn't know the halacha, no one knew the halacha. How could that be, really? Even if something happened 20 years ago, right, in our calendar. So I might not remember, exactly, whether I can have shalosh shudas in the morning or not. Right, but I will remember that I have to get rid of my chametz by a certain time. I mean, certain basic halachot, I don't care. I'm not going to forget about them. Right. So, korban pesach, there should have been somebody who remembered this. I mean, it happened 20 years ago. It happened 30 years ago. But how did it happen? So the Yerushalmi actually asks the question. Yerushalmi gives an answer that isn't terribly satisfying, other than to say it happened in order that Hillel should be appointed the Nasi. In other words, sort of miraculously, everyone forgot so that Hillel would remember and become the Nasi. Okay, maybe. Another possibility is from number 4 here, is that has been, they found in the Qumran, in the caves, they found calendars that were used by the different groups, and apparently one which is the Essin, and also it seems to have been the Tzduki calendar as well, was very different than our calendar. I guess without getting into the details, I just you divide the year into 3-month quarters, and each quarter would start on the same day of the week and was always Wednesday, which would mean that if this was the calendar that had been used, the big black hole, there are certain black holes in Jewish history where we really don't know anything, very little, as to what was actually going on, because records have either were kept or they've been destroyed. So the biggest of those black holes is the period of Bayit Sheni, from the time of Ezra, and even Ezra and Nehemiah's We have it in Tanakh, but it's not too many stories that are there. But certainly from that time until the Hanukkah story, really, or very close to the Hanukkah story, and that's a 400-year period of time. Right? It's the Persian period until Alexander the Great in the 330s BCE comes and conquers the area, and then we have more records once he comes in terms of from the Greek side, because of that his empire is broken up upon his death, and so first we're under the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. Anyway, but that becomes the discussion, etc. But until the time of the Maccabim, we really know very, very little about what's going on. We have some Svarim from that time. So we don't know, really don't know. This story is going on in the 1st century BCE. And CE, the beginning of the 1st century CE. So under that time, who is in control of the Mikdash? Who is in control of the calendar? Is it many of the Rabbanim we know were slaughtered by Herod and by Jannius. So if the Stukim are in charge for decades, and now the Prushim are coming back, right? So it's not 20 years, it's not 50 years, it could be 100 years since the last time the calendar was set the way that we think the calendar should be set. Sanhedrin goes underground. All of these things have occurred. And so now there isn't the Masorah, or the only thing you could do is the Masorah. What should we do? This is the first time that it worked out, that it's Erev in many years. So that's certainly a possibility. And so maybe that's what happened. They simply didn't know because they didn't have the Masorah. And so now we have to, and the question is, what would they have done had there not been Hillel? Would they have just not brought the Korban Pesach that year at all? Would everyone have gone to wait a month? Right? I don't know. These questions, but Hillel comes and, as it were, saves the day. But they're arguing back and forth, and it's the Masorah. So Hillel makes this claim that Pesach is a Korban Tzibur. Now, later than Hillel, and I'm taking a look at number 3, it's not so clear. The Tosefta in Temura, and there's a parallel Mishnah but leaves out Korban Pesach, which is why I brought the Tosefta. Korbanot Sibur Dochim et HaShabbat et HaTuma. So the Korbanot, which are considered to be communal Korbanot, are outrank Shabbat and Tuma. So even if everyone is Tameh, you bring those Korbanot. Korbanot Yachid einam dochim lo et HaShabbat v'lo et HaTuma divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So Amar lo Rabbi Yaakov. So Rabbi Yaakov said to Rabbi Yehuda, Matzinu b'chavitei Kohen Mashiach upar Yom HaKippurim v'haPesach shehen Korbanot Yachid v'dochin et HaShabbat et HaTuma. So we don't have time to get into what those other 2 Korbanot that are brought. But I'll just mention, the Kohen Gadol brought a Korban every day. Right, a Korban Mincha of his own, a grain offering, called the Korban Chavitim. So he would bring that on Shabbat. That's a personal Korban. Par Yom HaKippurim is the par of the Kohen Gadol, the bull that he would bring for himself or his family on Yom Kippur, and that's Doche Shabbat. Pesach is a Korban Yachid, and it's Doche. So here the Mishnah, some Tanaim after Hillel are calling this a Korban, not a Korban Tzibur, but a Korban Yachid. And so, okay, so what goes on here? Now there are those who want to say, and I want to get to the second topic, so do it a little faster than otherwise, is that Korban Pesach is we'll just say, is a hybrid. On the one hand, it's a Korban Yachid. Every person, every Jew, has a responsibility for himself or herself to bring a Korban Pesach, and it's brought, as we all know, as a family Korban in groups, etc. That makes it a Korban Yachid. On the other hand, everybody has to do it. Right? The normal Korban Yachid, I have the choice. Do I want to do it? Do I not want to do it? Right? When will I bring it? I'll decide, look at my calendar, when's it convenient for me. Here, I don't have a choice. I have to do it. I have to come on the 14th of Nisan and bring my korban together with everyone else. So that makes it a communal type of korban. So how do I look at it? Is it primarily a korban yachid that everybody does? Or is it korban sibur because the fact that everyone does it? So that's really the question. And there are those, I'm not going to read them inside now, but it's interesting that they're all Lithuanian rabbanim of the late 19th and 20th century who were concerned about this, and they spoke about it. I'll just take what Rav Goren, the third Ashkenazic chief rabbi, founder of the Rabbanut Rashit of Tzahal as well, and so he, in one of his articles, so he says the following. He basically wants to say that the Korban Pesach, this hybrid nature of the Korban, is what makes it unique. And in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, it was more of a Korban Yachid. It was everyone's home was their own Beit HaMikdash. Now, I had each family brought their Korban in their home. So their home was the Mikdash, and their Mizbeach, as it were, and he's taking from Chazal when he says this, the Mizbeach was the doorposts. The Mizbeach was the lintel of the door. Right? By sprinkling the blood, that was my Mizbeach, if back in Pesach Mitzrayim. And that's an individual, that's decentralized. Every single person is their home. Now we all go together to the Beit HaMikdash. And we all have our individual korban. We're all going to have our individual seder. Yes, that's true. But we all have a central nexus point of the Beit HaMikdash. And he wants to compare that basically as saying, you know what? That's the Jewish history from Mitzrayim, where we are loosely connected slaves coming into freedom, and now we're going together to Sinai, where as an Am we're going to receive the Torah. And every Korban Pesach wants to capture that element. That's what we should be thinking about on the night of the Seder. We should be thinking that we are members of this nation in formation. It's not quite a national mitzvah yet. It's not a Korban Tzibur because there is no Tzibur. But we are going to become a Tzibur. And it's a snapshot of that moment. That's this hybrid of Tzibur and Yachid of Korban Pesach. And that, he wants to argue, was exactly what the machloket, or the question was, that day with Hillel and the Bnei Betera. Bnei Betera said, you know what? It's a Korban Yachid. And so as a Korban Yachid, you can't bring it. And Hillel said, no, it's a Korban Tzibur. And then, later on, it says it's a little more complicated, but I don't have time to get into it. That is if you will, even those people who disagree with Hillel afterwards and say it's primarily a Korban Yachid, but it's a Korban Yachid that's Doche Shabbat for other reasons. But it's this push me, pull you type of Korban that creates the question. Right? So that, and I would argue that for all we know, maybe there were years before Hillel, Bnei Betera, that it did fall out on Shabbat, and they didn't bring the Korban. Because at that time, the Chachamim of that generation looked at it as more as a Korban Yachid and said, it's not Doche Shabbat. And did they bring it the next day? Did they skip Pesach that year, the way that we'll skip, let's say, Shofar on Rosh Hashanah, right, on the first day, and they waited, everyone brought it on Pesach Sheni a month later? Lost in the midst of history. Right? I don't know.
Or Lulav.
Right? Or Lulav, same type of idea. So that, right, as I said, that could be the machloket. As I said, please look at these Bekorot on your own. There's more to be said on this part as well. The second element of Korban, of Erev Pesach, SheChal, Yot Shabbat, critical to halacha, which I'm not touching at all. I'll just mention it. And we'll say it in the Seder at the very end. Normally speaking, we'll say "Shenochal min hazvachim umin hapsachim." Right? We should eat from the korbanot and from the korban Pesach. And this year we'll say "Min hapsachim umin hazvachim," from the Pesach and then the zvachim. Why do we switch it? Because together with the korban Pesach, there was a special korban that was brought, which is on our Seder plate as the egg, and that is the korban chagiga. Now, I know that you would bring a special korban chagiga when it wasn't a chag yet, on Erev Pesach, and it was only brought if you needed extra food and different halachot. I'm not getting into it now. So what was done with that korban chagiga? We're not done with the korban chagiga when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbat, and the halacha is you don't bring the korban chagiga. Pesach you don't bring the korban chagiga. So that's why we switch the order. In other words, normally speaking, we would eat our korban chagiga first, and then eat our korban Pesach. When Erev Pesach falls on Shabbat, there's no korban chagiga. So we eat the korban Pesach. Then on the following day, we'd bring a korban chagiga, and that would be our Yom Tov meal for the rest of the week. So we say min hapsachim umin hazvachim in that order. Okay, that's the second element.
So
and I'm not going to go into it more now. Yeah.
Seder plate, do we put the egg out or not this year?
Yes, we put out the egg. It's the holy egg. Yes, the egg goes out. Yes, we don't. It would have been an interesting minhag not to put out the egg. I think I did see someone who said that on Erev Pesach this year you don't put out the egg. But I don't remember who it was. I think there is a shita there. What? Right. Okay. Okay. So for the 15 minutes that I have, 12 minutes that I have left, I want to talk about another major halachic issue. Right. We're going to fast forward a few hundred years to the Gaonim and to the Rishonim, which has been totally lost for us. Okay, totally lost. And so for this is the entire. You have the picture of from the Haggadah of the Rothschild Haggadah. It looks much better in color. So if, I think on when I sent it in color. So if you have it online, take a look at it. It's a really beautiful Haggadah. It's found in the National Library. I'm sure they put it out at this time of year. You can see it displayed. And here you see which we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, with regard to the matzah baking process. And this is in the order that it was done. Right, taking a look at the picture. And this was standard. You see it in other Haggadot as well. What's the fellow doing up in the top right corner? That's B'dikat Chametz. Okay? Then afterwards you have them getting the flour ready, right? And then bringing that flour for the matzah baking on the bottom of the page. And the very next illustration, which is on the next page, is sitting at the Seder and making Kiddush. Okay, it's not on your page. I'm just saying the next page of the Haggadah. Just so you should know. So that is that's the order. Because basically what happened, and this is we'll just open with the tour is written in the beginning, the first decades of the 14th century. So we're in Madrid, not Madrid. Madrid hadn't been founded yet, but Toledo, which isn't too far from Madrid, in Spain, and the Rav Yaakov Balaturim, the son of the Rosh, is writing his halachic work, which the Shulchan Aruch is based upon, and he starts the following siman Taf Nun Chet in Orach Chaim: Ein matchilin lihitasek bepat biyudalid ad achar vav shaot. You cannot bake your matzot on Erev Pesach, a regular Erev Pesach, until the afternoon of Erev Pesach. The standard custom every year in almost every Jewish community, and this continued in many communities up until the 18th into the 19th century, was that you baked your matzot on Erev Pesach. Period. Just bake your matzot Erev Pesach. And that was the standard practice. And especially if you have softer matzot, right? So then people, the Teimanim to this day, many Teimanim, bake matzot every day of Pesach. In other words, you want to have fresh bread, right? So you're going to bake your matzot right before your Seder, and then every subsequent day you're going to prepare. Yeah. What do you do when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbat? Right? How do you do it? Right? You can't bake. So should you bake it on Friday? Or should you bake it on Seder night? Right? That's the question. But before we get to that question, there's a more basic question, right? And he quotes a tshuva which is found. It goes back to the Gaonim. It goes back into at the very least, the late centuries of the first millennium. Ma'aseh be'echad she'afa matzot kodem arba sha'ot. There was somebody who wanted to get a jump on his Pesach preparations, right? House was clean. He had his little bag of bread, that he had gathered up the night before, right, with the feather, everything in there, right, the wooden spoon, right, Mekayim the mitzvah. And so now, beforehand, he wants to bake his matzot. So he went and baked his matzot. V'kvar bi'er chamtzo. He had already gotten rid of his chametz. He did everything early, right? Right? He was a yeket. V'asru rabotenu hamatzah. And the chachamim of that time said the matzah cannot be used for Seder night. Right? The itkish lepesach. The kevan de pesach enu nishchat ela mishei sha'ot ulamala af matzah ken. Right? They made a drush. It's not found in any Gemara. You can't prepare your matzot before the time that you would bring the Pesach. The same way the Korban Pesach has to be shechted in the afternoon, so too your matzot have to be baked for the Seder. And if you bake it too early, you can't. Right? It's possible. Right? Not chametz, but you can't use it for Seder night. Right? Usher. Every single year. Right? To understand what's going on. If Aval Rabbeinu Eliezer Hagadol, next bullet point, Ushmuel HaKohen Hitiru. Ach lechatchila yesh lizaher mishum chaviva mitzvah b'shata. So these two Rishonim, they are German Rishonim, Ashkenaz from the generation before Rashi. So this is the 11th century. So they were matir. In other words, they said, if you did it, we're not going to say you can't use the matzah, but don't do it again, right? Because it's important. It's good that you should do it in its proper time. And then it goes back and forth. If I made a table on the next page to go through all of the different opinions to understand that I brought here in the tour. Right, one which is really fascinating is the third in the table, the third opinion on the top table of normal years. He says the following: Machloket. This is the Rabbi. He's in the 13th century. Machloket, or 12th century. Machloket ben hatosefta v'Yerushalmi imutar lafot. I don't know if I'm reading it that way because I'm not. That's mine. L'fnei sheish sha'ot. There's a machloket. He brings diukim from the Tosefta and the Yerushalmi. Goes in one direction. Maskana b'shat hatchak nitan liistamech ala kula shel Tosefta. So if you're in dire straits, so then you can make your matzot earlier. Okay. He tells you what the dire straits are. Hagdarat shatachak leila seder kshu motzei Shabbat, like this year. V'gam leil chag hapascha shel hanotzrim. It's also Easter Sunday, right? Which doesn't fall out all that. This year it doesn't fall out in the same week, but it can. And apparently in the Middle Ages it happened not so infrequently, and so it's not totally clear. Right? When I read this the first time. And I took it dramatically. There were pogroms on Easter. Right? You're baking your thing. You're making your matzah. Which Christian children are you killing, etc. Right? All of this is going on. Right? So baking your matzah the night of Easter, little little iffy, right? So then maybe you don't want to do it. So that's one possibility. A little more prosaic was that and it's probably, maybe both ideas are true, is that at this time, people didn't have their own ovens in their own homes. So there were communal ovens, and one of the communal ovens were run by the Goyim. Right? They were the bakers. So they weren't working the night of their Chag. So Shabbat Chag is simply that you can't get in, you can't find an oven, right, to bake it. So therefore you can bake it earlier. Okay? So this is the questions that are going on. It was, do you bake matzah? When do you bake matzah? So what's incredible here, what I found to be incredible at least, is the last opinion, just to get to understanding, which is so totally foreign from our way of thinking. The tour here, the Medaktikimi Barcelona, those people who are very careful about the halacha in Barcelona. So as I said, the tour is he was of Ashkenazic descent, but the family migrated to Spain in the end of the 13th century. So they were in Madrid. And Barcelona, to Toledo, excuse me. But they went through Barcelona to get to Toledo.
Eventually Morocco.
Later on, they went to Morocco after 39 or 49. But Barcelona and there was a major center as well. So he knew about the Medaktikimi Barcelona. B'chol shana ofim kol hamatzot lifnei hamoed. So they were careful because of all of the, they don't want to have chametz in the house, and they don't want to have the bother and the trouble. Maybe by this time all the matzot are hard. Also, we spoke about this 2 weeks ago, that the moment that you start with the redel and making holes in the matzah, your matzah is going to be hard because the carbon dioxide is released through those holes and it becomes cracker-like. Right? Sephardi soft matzah don't have any of those ubiquitous holes that we're familiar with. So those are, for whatever the reason, they decided to be more careful and bake all their matzot earlier. What I found fascinating was this is the last line of the tour, but he started the siman with what we said originally, right? That you don't, right? Ein matchilin leitasek b'pat. He goes, he knows about these bedaktikin, but he doesn't follow that. He says these people, okay, they're frumaks, they're worrying about chametz, etc. But minhag Yisrael, you bake your matzot fresh. That's what you do. That's the tour. And as I said, that was the standard custom. The problem that comes up is twofold. One is that, so what do you do? So you can see there was a major machloket between people whether you should bake your matzot this year on Erev Pesach, so that they're ready. But the problem is you still have chametz in the house. So how can you do that, right? This goes against. Or do you bake your matzot on Motzei Pesach, Motzei Shabbat? We saw already the Rabbi saying, well, if it's the night of Easter, be careful. But other than that, maybe you should do it on Motzei Shabbat, but that means your Seder is going to start so much later, right? You have to fire up the oven, you have to do all the preparation, even though it only takes 18 minutes, right? You have less than 18 minutes to get those matzot in, but still, it's another major operation to get ready for the Seder. And there were people, you could see that the different Rishonim and then Achronim split on this question. Right? Should we be making our matzot on Friday? Should we be making our matzot on Motzei Shabbat? One last point as the shir comes to a close, and this is questioned by the Achronim. I brought the Aruch HaShulchan. I'm not going to read it inside, but the question is, how exactly did things change? In other words, if they're bringing limudim, and this is the minhag Yisrael, and they're saying, you know what, this is the way Seder is done. How did it come about that nobody, except for maybe some Teimanim, make their matzot anymore on Erev Pesach itself? Right? Forgetting about this year. How did that happen? So you see that. So really there are two things that happen. One is that, so basically the argument of the Aruch HaShulchan is that he asked the question, and he says the basic, because by the time the end of the 19th century, when he's writing, so nobody's doing this anymore. And as I said, really 100 years before, there were still plenty of communities that did do it. So he argued that it's a question of whether your matzah is hard or soft. If your matzah is soft, so then you need to have fresh bread. If your matzah is cardboard, right? So Baruch Hashem, the cardboard lasts just as well, and it doesn't matter, and you can prepare it earlier. And so since all our matzot are hard matzot, right? So that's why we prepare it. And those limudim were only brought as a secondary explanation, but the real reason is that things are fresh. Okay. One, I wouldn't say problem, but one issue, and getting back to that picture of this Haggadah, right? You see the young boy there in the bottom right corner poking holes in the matzah in the 15th century, right? They were having hard matzah there, right? You see earlier Haggadot, and they also have those holes. That's part of the matzah baking process. They had hard matzah, and yet they were still baking hard matzot on Erev Pesach, right? So I think I heard it in the, what someone said is that it's just impossible. In other words, when people are at smaller communities, or you have smaller amounts of, you have communal ovens in general, and you bake your bread fresh every day, so then you can do it with your matzah too. But today, and already and you see it already earlier, those places that are more makil, as it were, are places where there were larger concentrations of Jewish communities, bigger communities, and certainly in the 19th century, where you have people leaving the countryside, going into the cities, having factories producing matzah, because forgetting even the question that we spoke about, whether hand or machine, etc., but even in the time of the hand matzahs, but you have to have large bakeries that are doing it, it's impossible, right, to prepare all those matzot in Erev Pesach. So the necessity, if you will, won the day. We should all be zocha. We still have time. Maybe this year we'll meet in the mikdash, with our sheep, waiting to roast our lambs on Motzei Shabbat, right? And if not, right, there should be a Chag kasher v'sameach with regard to all of the, every single aspect of our Siddharim, with a Korban Pesach, without.
To see the issue in a much less mundane way, I'm waiting for delivery. It seems that the law, or this custom, was related to the fact that there's this connection between matzah and the Korban Pesach. And the fact that they developed this idea that you only bake your matzah was because they weren't doing the Korban Pesach. Okay, so because they're connected, that they say, well, this is a reflection of the Pesach.
Right. So it's a great idea, and it's in the source as well. The question is whether it is a post facto idea. In other words, people are baking their matzahs, and then they say, hey, we could, exactly what you just said, we could give a really good vort. We don't have a Korban Pesach, but we have our matzah. It seems that that's the way it happened. In other words, that the rationale, the nice rationale, followed the practical side of things. But you're right. It could be. I don't know. How do I turn this off?
Okay. Well.